Hello. How y'all doing? It's 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I know we still have people rolling in. My name is Eddie Ferguson. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity for Ocean Infinity. I'm the announcer for today for the ICS track. And I'd like to introduce, for our very first afternoon session, Ms. Roya Gordon. She's a Navy veteran in cybersecurity, or intelligence analyst from back in the day, which is really cool. And she's also a cybersecurity professional with extensive expertise in OT and IoT. And throughout her career, she's worked with organizations such as Nozomi Networks, Accenture, Idaho National Laboratory, providing strategies to Fortune 100 companies on safeguarding their critical assets. And some of her areas of expertise include OT and IoT vulnerabilities, cyber threat intelligence, and ransomware resilience. She's collaborated with various industries and the information sharing and analysis centers, and has contributed to the development of U.S. government cybersecurity strategies and policies. And she's a founding board member of the Internet of Things Security Foundation here in the Houston chapter, and also an agency advisor on cyber for Florida International Institute. That's pretty impressive. That's awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Gordon.
All right, thanks everyone. The mic is on, okay. So my name is Roya. I'm currently at a company called Hexagon ALI, Asset Lifecycle Intelligence. If you all heard of a company called PAS, they were acquired by Hexagon a couple of years ago, and we are in the OT cybersecurity space, focusing on asset inventory, vulnerability management, et cetera. The reason why I'm doing this presentation is because I've been on several sides of this OT asset inventory thing. And even though I've been at Hexagon for only a couple of months, I'm realizing that all asset inventory tools are not the same. They don't do things the same way. But in prospect engagements and even customer engagements, they just assume that it's all the same thing, and it kind of gets grouped into this bucket. After learning more about our technology, I'm like, wow, we don't necessarily compete with other tools out there. We actually complement. We actually can fill a gap that other tools aren't able to fill. I was on a partner call earlier this week, and they asked some of the questions that I'm going to address in this presentation. So that's why I'm like, I need to come out with a blog. I'm going to be on a road show later where I'm going to be presenting this throughout the months, because it's just a needed topic that isn't talked about often. I know that competitors will talk about how they're better, but I really just want to focus on how we're different, right? Because better is okay, but how is it different, and how can we collaborate? I'm accompanied here by Ali. He's one of our solution consultants at Hexagon, and I brought him into the session because I know we're going to have some technical people here, and if you guys just have some deep-rooted technical questions, he's one of the smartest people I know, and he'll be able to answer that. So with that being said, let's get into it. So the title is a little bit misleading. I do talk about the different asset inventory methodologies, configuration files from backups, network taps, but I am going to talk a little bit about active queries. So those are kind of like the three main ways that asset inventory is collected. Now, because I know this isn't an ICS conference, it's a cybersecurity conference with the ICS track, I'm going to start a little high level, what is OT? What is asset inventory? But trust me, we're going to get into the reason why y'all are here. Okay, so I'm going to start with defining OT, talk about OT asset inventory, the benefits. It's not just about checking a box for compliance. There's a whole bunch of different benefits for OT asset inventory. And then I'm going to get into comparing the different asset inventory methods: passive network taps and deep packet inspection, active queries, and pulling configuration files from backups to get asset details. And then I'm going to talk about things that you can take into consideration, whether you're looking to partner, whether you're an integrator, whether you're an asset owner. These are things you should consider when deciding which tool or which combination of tools that you should choose. All right, what is OT? So the blanket definition is operational technology refers to the combination of hardware and software used for monitoring, controlling, and initiating changes in industrial equipment, assets, processes, and events. This is actually a little inaccurate, because Building automated systems aren't necessarily in industrial environments. They're in universities, they're in hospitals, but they're still operational technology. So I want to talk about each of these technologies, and I'm going to try to explain it in the highest level possible. And this is important because once I get into the rest of the presentation, you'll understand why these pieces of technology and how they communicate is essential when it comes to choosing different asset inventory methodologies. So let's start with a little bit of pairing. Let's talk about our actuators, our PLCs, and our DCS. When you think of an actuator, think of physical movement. Think of a valve opening and closing, something that's converting signals into energy to cause a physical movement. Think of tripping a circuit breaker, right? They're made to just receive commands and to execute the commands, and that's pretty much it. The programmable logic controllers, the PLCs, they're the ones sending out the commands to the actuators. They're also receiving inputs from other different types of technologies like the DCS, the distributed control system, or the SCADA system. The DCS is pretty much a system that's controlling an entire plant environment. So if you have a couple of different PLCs in the plant, you want them to report into the DCS so that it has full visibility into all of your plant interactions. Now let's talk about RTUs and sensors. Sensors are collecting field information, temperature and pressure and flow, and they're converting that analog information and the signals into digital information. I didn't add converters in here because some sensors have built-in conversion capabilities, or RTUs or RTACs can do that, but sometimes there's that middleman or woman that is the converter that's going to convert what the sensor is putting out and then sending that to the RTU. And again, the RTU is just there collecting all of that sensor information, and depending on how the environment is set up, it could be pushing it to the DCS or it could be pushing it directly to a SCADA system. So let's talk about SCADA and HMI. SCADA, is self-explanatory. Supervisory control and data acquisition. It's supervising industrial processes. It's monitoring. It's controlling it. So through the human-machine interface, through that screen, you're able to use a mouse and you're able to control and make changes in remote locations. And then you're acquiring data. You need to acquire a whole bunch of data so you can have a digital twin, which is a digital version of the plant, some graphs, some pie charts, and all of that. Now, what's important here is when you think of localized control, think of your RTUs and think of your DCSs, right? That's going to control the actual plant. Think of central management, that's the SCADA system. They're going to be able to see activity across several different plants. So a whole bunch of DCSs report up into a SCADA system, and then, a control engineer somewhere is the one that's looking at 10, 20 different sites that they're monitoring. I also want to point out, again, that actuators, they're meant to just receive commands. I want to talk about how sensors, they're able to emit information, but not necessarily asset information. They're emitting, this is the temperature, and now that the temperature is at this threshold, it's going to cause the PLC and the actuators to do an action. So there isn't a real set structure because, again, there's some environments that don't have a DCS. They just have a whole bunch of PLCs reporting into the SCADA system. But again, these are kind of the main industrial control systems when you're talking about OT, operational technology. I didn't include building automated systems. They're technically OT too, but that's just not, that's not why we're here. Okay, so what is OT asset inventory? So asset inventory ensures that the hardware and the software firmware components of an industrial automation and control system are verified, documented, and maintained. You're going to hear a lot of these terms used interchangeably. You'll hear OT/ICS. You'll hear IACS. They're all essentially the same thing. I could argue that ICS is a subset of OT, but again, it's all used pretty interchangeably. So asset inventory, we know what inventory is. Think of a warehouse. You want to know how much of a product you have, where it's located, when you need to replace it, when it's running low. In industrial environments, it's necessary to have an asset inventory, but here's the challenge. I'm not a history buff, but if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, right? Think about all the industries. Think of rail, think of oil and gas, think of the power grid. they were made without security in mind. There was no concept of securing those environments. They were just built to run. There was no concept of having an asset inventory. I mean, if you look at some of these plants, things are still in binders. So maintenance procedures, if they want to know how to do maintenance, they're flipping through a binder. Same thing with asset inventory. It's not updated, not even annually. So it's just a lot of outdated asset inventory methodologies that all need to be digitized. So it's important to understand what devices you have running in your system, the manufacturer, which is, the vendor, the version. You need to know the patch level. You need to know if it's coming to its end of life, if you've heard of legacy systems or EOL. These devices were made to run for about 20 to 30 years. If you know that it's coming to its end of life where it's no longer going to be operable, if you don't have asset inventory, how do you know that it needs to be replaced? If there's a vulnerability that's targeting that specific system, how do you know what vendor and version you have in order to patch? If a device is no longer being supported, how do you know that you need to replace it? So again, asset inventory is very, very important. This is a screenshot, and this is not a vendor pitch, by the way, but I had to pull the information from somewhere. So this is a screenshot from our cyber integrity tool, and it's just a visualization of how we look at, how we try to visualize asset inventory, right? So you have your computers, your network devices, but here are the industrial control systems. You can break it down by vendor, right? So you have your Honeywell, your Siemens, your Triconics. And then from there, the different products, then the different version numbers, and then how many you have. Was there an increase in this specific system or a decrease? Which one needs to be replaced? I mean, you can go into the weeds in this tool, but this is what asset inventory should look like in 2023. You should be able to know exactly what you have, where it is, most importantly, because if you're supervising multiple different sites and you know that CISA came out with an alert saying, a Siemens device with this version is vulnerable. How will you know what site to go to, how many of them you have, and where to patch, when to patch, if there is a patch available? So again, really, really important to have asset inventory. And let's talk about some benefits. A lot of people think that asset inventory is just checking a box, like, oh, regulatory compliance, the ton that's out there, they say that we need asset inventory, so we're going to get a tool and boom, we're good to go. Compliance is actually a byproduct of all of these things happening, from cyber attacks and vulnerable devices. They had to come out with regulations to force people to have cyber or asset inventory. So it's not asset inventory and we're checking compliance and that's it. Let's go around the wheel, right? Vulnerability management. You need to know, again, what device, what version. What's most important is if there's an active exploit, because there's one thing to have a vulnerability, and yes, you want to patch it, but if you know there's an active exploit created to exploit that vulnerability, then you probably need to prioritize patching. Threat intelligence, depending on the solution that you're using, you're able to kind of see that network traffic, you're able to see nefarious activity going on in your process control network or your operational technology network. You're able to see if there's an outside device trying to communicate with your operational technology. You're able to block certain indicators of compromise. So if there's a threat actor that's using certain signatures and certain IOCs, then you can block that or block them from communicating with your devices. Incident response, so when you think about in a ransomware incident and an IR team has to get deployed, how are they going to know how to do incident response if you don't even know what you have or what's supposed to properly be communicating to certain devices? So it really helps when it comes to incident response. Operational efficiency, right? This, and we're going to talk about it when we talk about collecting asset inventory from configuration management. It's not just about the IP and the MAC address and the vendor and the version number. If you're able to see how the device is configured, how it's programmed to operate, what's the threshold, how much data can it hold, what are the changes in the configurations, you're able to have overall operational efficiency. You're able to know, okay, this device, it's coming up at its end of life, or it's not operating the way that it should. So it's kind of a beyond checking the box of, oh, threat intelligence, we're securing our network. You're actually securing the actual device. And then safety, all of this tied to safety. We're talking about plant environments. We're talking about an environment where people they can be harmed, things can explode. Think about a valve not opening and all that pressure is building up. So all of it is tied to safety. And I like to talk to CISOs and executives that are like, we don't have time to focus on OT security right now. And it's like, well, if you're focused on safety, you should be focused on security because it actually ties together. You can't have safety without security. That's what I like to say. Okay, so now let's get into comparing the different asset inventory methods. And again, I just really wish that all the OT asset inventory tools would come together for a big kumbaya to really understand how we can really partner and come together to help the industry, because it's really, it's about sales and you want to be the best, but it's really about how do we allow companies to have the best visibility into their environments, because let's just face it, like one of these tools just can't do everything. That's why we partner with other solutions and we layer it, but within OT asset tools themselves, there could be a lot of partnerships that could happen in order for you to achieve full asset inventory and asset visibility. A network tap, so you'll hear about that. And I'm gonna get into each of these, explain it at a high level, and then talk about the challenges and the pros and the cons, not just the challenges. Network tap, active queries, and configuration files. All right, so a tap. A test access point. I have the little ear right there because you're listening in on the network. You're not swimming in the traffic. You're just kind of listening in. You're taking a copy of that network traffic, and then you're doing a deep packet inspection. So you're doing in-depth analysis of all the network traffic that you're taking a copy of. This is passive, non-invasive to OT environments. You know, a lot of companies, they don't want anyone tampering with what they have going on, and it seems to be the fastest way to get an asset inventory. Maybe not as robust, but you'll get something. Let's talk about the benefits. So again, it provides basic information for some types of OT systems relatively quickly. It's a plug and play. You can get asset inventory within a couple of minutes. So if you're racing the clock to be compliant, then maybe this is a solution for you. Anomaly detection, so you're able to determine what known good network traffic is in your OT environment. And then from there, you're able to see the anomalies. You're able to see what isn't right. You know, these devices are normally communicating, and now there's something strange going on over here. I'm gonna get alert on it, and I'm able to investigate what is poking around in my OT network. What I also like about this method is you can get a whole bunch of different solutions in one. Threat detection and prevention. You can block malware. You can prevent data exfiltration. You can get kind of like firewall, intrusion detection, and intrusion prevention capabilities all in one tool. It makes sense for a network tap solution, or it's usually called a DPI solution. So if you hear that term, just know it's a network tap DPI solution. So when you do a network tap, you can also layer threat intelligence on top of it because you're already seeing the network, and now it's not just about the asset inventory. You can take additional steps to secure the network. There are some challenges with this methodology. Detailed level 1 and 0 inventory data typically does not communicate over a network, and then many level 1 to 0 assets are islanded and disconnected from the network. This is where I created this chart here, where in green it shows what a network tap and a DPI solution can see, but in red, it can't see that. What's at the physical level? It's the configuration of the device. It's the configuration file. So it's how the device is actually operating. And what's big and why this is important is if a threat actor, for whatever reason, they exploit a device and they're able to make configuration changes, how are you able to control or do change management? How are you able to know that this is the baseline configuration and there was a change here done by whom? Now, there's issues with there being a lot of shared passwords in these environments, so sometimes when changes are made, you don't really know who because no one has individual passwords, so that would have to be layered with, you know, identity and access management, privilege access management, but for the most part, it's not going to see that physical layer. So you're only going to be able to secure a certain part of your assets, but not that level. Also, you know, we know about insider threats. Shameless plug, I'm actually going to be speaking on that at Atlanta ICS in a couple of weeks. But what if someone has a USB drive and they want to plug things in directly? That's not communicating on the network, right? How are you able to see that if you're only tapping the network and collecting that asset inventory that way? And then also there's tens of thousands of events to parse. There's a lot going on in network traffic. It's not just asset information. So there's a lot of tools that use AI to be able to parse through all of that noise to get the information that they need. But again, I'm not saying that the challenges is a deal breaker, but when you're having conversations, these are questions that you should be asking to determine if this is best for your network or if you need to augment it with another solution. And then enterprise IT typically doesn't use this method for asset management. You know, it's a challenge, but I actually think it's kind of cool that you're able to take a method that isn't used traditionally in IT to collect asset inventory and then use it in OT to do that. Because we know there's like a fight and war between IT and OT, and they do it differently. But I kind of like that, you know. But again, it could be considered a challenge. Active queries, all right? So I popped this in here. I'm not gonna go over it into detail, but it is a method in which companies use to collect asset inventory. So when you're doing an active query, you're actively swimming in that network traffic. You are sending specific requests or commands to the OT devices. Companies that specialize in this area, they know that they have to use ICS protocols, whether it's Modbus or DPN3, and able to communicate to that device in their specific language. And then different protocols may require different commands and formats. So it takes a deeper level of expertise to be able to do this. Benefits, the growing market acceptance. There's a growing market acceptance to this as passive network detection limitations become better understood. So that physical layer that the DPI won't give you visibility into, if you're doing an active query, you're able to see that. And so I know in the past there were companies that, I don't want anything interfering with my OT environment. Well, you know, if it's able to be done securely and safely and you're getting a deeper asset inventory, then it may be something to consider. Challenges, right? Again, improper targeting can disrupt OT devices. So the first slide, I don't think I have a back button, it's okay. So the first slide where I talked about OT, there's certain devices that aren't meant to respond to anything. So if you're querying them when they weren't made to respond, that could create some kind of challenge, again, if not done correctly. So that could be a little bit of a challenge. And then at the end, may violate automation vendor warranties. This is something that a lot of people don't take into consideration. They're just like, oh, this tool sounds great. And then later on, they realize that the vendor is no longer covering it because you have something, an unauthorized tool communicating with your device. And now the vendor could say, well, we no longer can cover if it breaks down because you did something to disrupt the integrity of this device. So you just have to read the vendor agreements to see what it says and to see if it allows for I don't want to say unauthorized, but it just wasn't meant to communicate in that kind of way. You just have to check with the vendor and in your agreements to see. There are some vendors that honestly don't allow it. So again, these are deeper conversations you should have before deciding to choose this method. All right. Configuration files. So again, PLCs, DCSs, they have a lot of configuration files, right? Because it all ties to how the device is running, serial number, hardware version, firmware version, the commands that it's programmed with, and then if it's a DCS and it's managing a whole bunch of different PLCs that's also receiving a whole bunch of information from sensors, that's a lot of configuration. That's a lot of data that's housed in these devices. So benefits, and it's not just configuration files. I want to be clear, you know, with how Hexagon does it. It's not just configuration files being pulled directly from the assets. It's being pulled from backups. So again, it's not intrusive at all. It's being pulled from backups where companies and OT should have backups anyway. So it's purpose-built for OT asset inventory, and you get the deepest inventory and visibility. So yes, while an active query could give you that level 1, level 0 visibility, pulling from the configuration files themselves can give you all the visibility you need in that OT asset. It supports isolated, transient, island, air-gapped assets, some assets that aren't continuously connected to the network. Now, if you're just looking at those configuration files, you can get all the asset information, and it kind of fills that gap. Because again, if you have a DPI solution that's only able to see 80% of your environment because the rest aren't communicating on a network, well, if you're pulling from the configuration files, you now have visibility into the rest. And that's kind of what I mean with a lot of these tools aren't necessarily competitors. They more kind of fill gaps and they're complementary. Of course, like anything, there's challenges, and I'm not here to just say that we're the best and there aren't challenges. Obviously, these challenges can be addressed, but in the broader scheme of things, there could be challenges in obtaining numerous account privileges required to collect data. There are easier ways of doing that now, but of course, if you want to pull configuration files, accounts have to be created in order to be able to do that. But again, not a big of a challenge as it seems. And then this actually isn't really a challenge, but it can be perceived as a challenge, assumes PLC backup repository. So like I mentioned, OT environments should be backing up their devices anyway. But in the event that like one of our prospects or customers don't have backups, we're like, okay, we got to take a step back now. If you don't have backups, we'll back up for you, and then now we can move forward with getting these configuration files. So in a way, it's a little challenge because it forces you to take that extra step of making sure that they're backed up, but then at the end of the day, they need to be backed up anyways, right? We want them to be backed up. And that's kind of what I like about this, because it's not just asset inventory, it's automation integrity, it's cybersecurity, it's vulnerability management, change management if you get deeper into, the configuration files and comparing them against what's known good. So as I wrap this up, let me talk about some considerations. So again, whether you're an end user, whether you're an integrator, whether you're a consultant, I actually had some consultants reach out saying, hey, we're usually using this one tool, and our customers asked us about PAS. So it's kind of like they're forcing consultants to reach out to us to learn more about the solution, because although they have one seemingly good asset inventory tool, they're running into the problem of, we're not really seeing enough, or we can't do as much as we want with the data, and we need something a little bit deeper. Scope of visibility. Again, if you just need to check the box, then sure, maybe you start off with a DPI tool, and then later on, when you become a little bit more mature, when you get into change management and configuration management, or you just want to have deeper visibility into the cybersecurity of your industrial control systems, you can move on to something else. Network impact, again, with those active queries, you just have to ask the right questions to make sure what would be the impact to your network, and this is all based on how your network is configured. Scalability, I'm not going to go through all of these. Configuration and setup. Frequency. So with DPI solutions, yes, they're able to see network traffic in real time, able to determine the changes. If you're pulling from configuration files from backups, it's not real time. So maybe the company is backing up every 3 months, every week. It's not going to be that real-time visibility that maybe an active query or DPI solution will give you. That's why they fill gaps. So configuration files from backups fills a gap that DPI leaves open, and vice versa. So this configuration solution could be layered with threat intelligence or another asset inventory solution that's looking at the network. And then ease of use, of course. You want something that has a good UI, that's not too complicated. You can see everything under one pane of glass. With the configuration files, what makes it easy, and especially if you have a tool that's able to convert data from all the different vendors and you can see it all in one UI, that's super convenient, because Siemens and all the other OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, they have their own way of doing asset inventory. So we're not saying that this isn't being done. But in plant environments, or just in any industrial environment, they're using different vendors. So do you want to sit in front of a whole bunch of different screens, managing it separately, or figure out how you can pull that all into one so you can have full visibility from all your different vendors into one? Cost, of course, you got to look at what the short term and the long term. So if it's expensive and it's a little costly up front, well, in the long term, what is it going to help you achieve? And then I know that kind of ties, that's like bigger board level, decisions. But, I know cost can deter people sometimes from choosing a solution. But again, when you think of that long-term roadmap, it might actually be the best solution. Compliance, all of these solutions check that compliance box. Integration, so again, if you're dealing with the DPI versus configuration files, if you're a fellow vendor, you want to know how it integrates, then that's something you should take into consider. And this is consideration, and this is a big one, that vendor support. Because a lot of times you get tool and it sounds good, and then you have it deployed and then you have issues, and then there's not newer versions released, or you're trying to call someone or email someone and no one's responding. So you kind of have to ask, how's the services team, the customer success team, how much support am I going to get once I buy this tool? And again, no one talks about that up front because everyone's trying to make a quick sale, and then at the end, that's when people are miserable because they're like, we don't have any support over this tool. I will say that that's why a lot of OT companies and OT solutions leverage consultants, because consultants are working directly with the client. They're able to kind of answer those questions, and worst case scenario, then you can kind of pull in the vendor for support. That's why it's important for us to train up all the consultants on the pros and cons of all of these solutions so that they can best advise clients on that client level. And before I wrap up, I just want to say the main point of this conversation. Yes, I presented, the different methodologies and the pros and cons, but for complex environments, consider leveraging a combination of tools to achieve comprehensive asset visibility and accuracy. There is no one size fits all. There is no this one works and that one doesn't. Yeah, with that being said, I do want to open it up for questions. I purposely left 15 minutes at the end because I not only want to leave it open for questions, I want to see, have y'all seen kind of like this combination of different tools and environments that you're in? Have you heard feedback? Have you been asked these kinds of questions? Like I said, I've been on calls recently where everyone's like, oh, well, we have this solution, we're good. And it's like, wait, do you really understand what we do, and how we're different, and how we're a complement? So with that being said, I'm going to invite Ali up here. Thank you for coming. and leave it open for questions, any questions you might have on the different methodologies or on how we do what we do when we pull asset information from configuration files. Wealth of knowledge right here. So thank you for coming to my talk, and we're sticking around for questions. No, thanks. Yeah.
So the asset inventory is basically the main piece of foundation for cybersecurity. Without having visibility to your inventory, it will be impossible. Oh, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. So the main thing is asset inventory. Without having visibility to your inventory, it will be almost impossible to do things like vulnerability management. So in order to protect what you have, you need to know what you have. And when you're going out, like when you have like some customers or people who have like 30 facilities that they're trying to manage, when there's a vulnerability that comes out about like a communication module for a safety system, if they don't have a comprehensive evergreen inventory in place, it will be difficult to know where is this vulnerability is so that they can go and resolve it as needed.
But I can also add that from when I was at Accenture to Nozomi to where I'm at now, it's like I'm seeing some very similar companies, some very similar customers, and I'm like, oh, I thought they had that solution, but then they're coming back around saying, well, no, we want to see how you can help us. So I would say pretty much like all the players in the game, your Chevrons, your Shells, like your Motivas, your DuPonts, like they're pretty much talking to all of the solutions, and what I'm realizing is they're not just trying to weigh the pros and the cons, they're actually saying like, we have this, but then we need something else, and we need something a little bit deeper. So that's kind of what I've been seeing, but compliance does help because it's forcing people to do asset inventory instead of waiting until you have an attack and now you're like, oh crap, I don't know what I have. So even though it's a little bit of regulation overload, I think it does kind of aid in everyone like kind of taking it a little bit more seriously.
And just one last thing, and I'm actually working with customers who have certain tools, and then they're just coming to us to complement or fill in the gaps of what they are missing. They have like 80% grasp on their inventory. It's like, hey, I need this 20%, and that's when we come in and help them fill in the gaps so that they can do other things much more efficiently, because everything is based on inventory. When you have a good inventory, then everything else will fall under. Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, go ahead.
This is a great question. So Hexagon itself, like where both of us are working, they support more than 120 vendors. You could be PLC, safety systems, DCSs. So if it's a system that we don't support, we have capabilities to do manual inventory. But again, if also like with the market and requirement, we are able to develop this model as needed to help our customers if there's a market value. But this is a different conversation. But right now we have about 120 different asset models for each vendors from different like Siemens, Honeywell, Emerson, that we are able to collect the configuration backup files and then be able to process it into our application. Exactly. So this is a conversation we'll have with the customers on how many systems that they have and what they are trying to monitor and manage within the application. And from there, we'll be able to get the asset that they chose, and then we'll have it in our application. And of course, if it's not showing up, we'll have more conversation on how to get them into the application. Sure. So with these configuration files, so there's two things. There's the cyber integrity. We have cyber integrity, basically is for securing these assets, and there is like asset management. So we take these configuration backup files from these systems to help operators and plant engineers to be able to maintain and monitor the data. Any changes to their files, they'll be able to see that. Any connections, references, because each company will have multiple DCSs, multiple PLCs that connects and talks to each other. So what we do is we take these files and we put them together and we connect them so that when a user open the UI, they'll be able to see those control maps. If they want to take something out of service, they'll be able to see what's connected to, what is it affecting. Any changes to the data, they will be able to see what was changed, when was changed, and all of that. Of course, it's not a live system, so it's basically on the frequency that you set the application to run, and then you'll be able to see those changes as needed. Okay. Yes, so our application has integration capabilities. There's a slide actually that shows you the third-party customers that we integrated with. We're working a lot now on ServiceNow integration as well. Another thing, but again, we're open to integrate with other software, other companies, but it's just like a broader conversation. But we have a list of people, of customers that we've already integrated with, including ServiceNow, and they're working into more seamless integration capabilities as well. Ignitions. Yeah, actually, and this is something that I can leave a note on. But again, we're more than happy to integrate with people that we haven't integrated with. It's just a bigger conversation than today. But yes, we have integration capabilities in the software. Yes. Sure. Sometimes, I want to say 50-50. Sometimes you'll have customers where they have all their backups ready, and it's easier to get those backups and just transfer them and process them. And some customers, they don't have a method or a process in place for that. So we help them also to have a process in place so that for us to be able to get those files securely transferred, where is a data collector to process this into the database. So I would say 50-50. Sometimes they have a process in place and sometimes they don't.
Cool. All right. Y'all have some time back. Thank you.